We started, or we learned last week, or the last few weeks, Siman Shin Yud Chet. Shin Yud Chet, Chaim. Chaim. Shin Yud Chet, Amen. Shin Yud Chet talks about cooking on Shabbat. That's the main topic of Shin Yud Chet. And food is very essential. We are now drinking l'chaim together, so food is something important. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol yam torah.
Amen.
We aren't serving you, but if you want to take for yourselves, you are fine. So moving to another topic of food, and that's borer, separating food on Shabbat. And before we go to the halachot of borer, which probably take us this week, and
First halacha you're learning of the 39.
so we learned cooking, mevashel, and we're continuing on to borer, because both of them are got to do with food, although usually the order is opposite. Usually first you sift, or you separate food, and then you cook. The Shulchan Aruch has, the two has his own order. Doesn't necessarily on the chronological way, according to the Mishnah in Shabbat. It's more of the importance of things that we meet while we eat or during the day of Shabbat. That's more or less the order in the Shulchan Aruch. Now, before we go into borer, into the details of borer, we need to explain or learn two things, a few things about it. How many melachot from the 39 melachot do we have about cooking food on Shabbat? One melacha on cooking. How many melachot do we have about plowing a field on Shabbat? One. About shechting an animal on Shabbat? One. How many melachot do we have about separating on Shabbat? Well, that's your one. Okay, one. How many gods do we have? One. Okay, fine. Yeah, one. But okay, now here comes a serious question. Okay, how many melachot out from the 39 do we have about separating food on Shabbat? So we have borer. Okay, we have zoreh and meraked. For some reason, we have 3 different melachot out of the 39, 1 out of 13, that have got to do with separating food on Shabbat. In a moment, we'll explain each one of them. Which brings quite a question of why so much. Another question, we'll answer that also soon. When I cook something, am I creating here something? Yeah, I'm creating something new, right? When I paint something, is there a new creation here? Yes, even when we shecht something. Now there's a live animal, there's a isu, you aren't allowed to eat the meat because of ever minachai, and now it can be eaten. So all of the menachot of Shabbat have a creation aspect in them. There's one melacha, which is a question exactly what kind of creation is it? It's the first melacha that the Mishnah of Shabbat mentions. It's transferring hotza'ah, moving something from a private zone to the public zone. And that's a whole discussion. What exactly are we creating here? But typically, all of the melachot on Shabbat are got to do with creation. We are creating something, and that's why on hotza'ah, on transferring things, the Rishonim will call it melacha gru'ah. It's not a strong melacha, it's an interesting melacha. Okay. So now comes the question: what are we creating in separating food? It's the same. A new pile. I'm creating a new pile, right? But if we say that transferring something from a private zone to a public zone, it's got to do with, it's a bad melacha, it's a weak melacha. I'll also think or assume that separating food, I just moved it from one place to another place. Okay, I'm sure all of us have kids that when they were young, maybe when we were young, we were very picky eaters. And when we had salad, so we used to take out, I don't like the cucumbers, and I don't like the tomatoes, and the mushrooms, and some of us would just move it to the side, and some of us would say if it touched the tomatoes, so I can't eat it. So you take everything to the side. But there's no, what are we creating here? In the end, there's a mixture. And now it's the same thing. The law of the same thing. So we're trying to answer those two things. And then we will start going more into the details of the melacha. So the Gemara asks, why do we have three melachot? Three melachot, we said zoreh, borer, and meraked, for the same idea of separating food. And the Gemara says the way it was in the Mishkan. So the Mishnah mentions the way of the Mishkan. What's zoreh? Zoreh is when you use the wind in order to help you separate the wheat, the grains from the wheat, and all the leaves around it. So you throw the grains up to the wind, and the wind blows the light pieces, and the heavier pieces land closer to you. So that's the separation of zoreh. Meraked is using some kind of sift, a sifter. That's meraked. And borer could many times be by hand or by other instruments, just separating between different things. And so it's different ways of doing it, and different ways to do it in the Mishkan. Based on that, that's how we did it. There's also something unique about it, that zoreh, I throw the grains into the wind. Who's doing the separation? The wind. Hashem, the wind, right? But in the end, I am using the power of nature in order to do the separation. So one kind of separating is if you do it by hand, or if you do it by the nature. Okay, so that's why we need both kinds of them, both to, like, also zoreh and also borer. So why do you need also borer and also meraked? We have usually something called a shinui. If I do something in the non-regular way, we'll get to shinui also today, hopefully today. Let's say, for example, I write something, I write a book, but instead of using a pen, I sharpen my nail, dip it inside ink, and write it. That's might be called a shinui. It's not a regular way of writing, and therefore, at least in Torah law, it will be patur. So a lot of the shinui, a lot of the differences is if you do it by hand or by machine. Sometimes by machine will be the regular way, sometimes by hand will be the regular way. But in separating things, everything will be the regular way. I do it by machine, I do it by hand, I do it with the wind, with the power of nature. That's separation. That's called borer. We will call it all, but borer is one thing. We can see already that the idea of separation is something very important in our life. Right? The idea to identify between good and bad, right? Between food that I like and food that I dislike. That's very, very important. Have you ever seen a cow eating its food? No? So they get the food. You live in the city, you have to go to a kibbutz. So they give the food, and they just eat whatever they have. If they have a leaf, they'll eat the leaf. If they have the grains, they'll eat the grains. If they have corn, they'll eat the corn. Sometimes they'll go to a nicer spot. But as soon as they find something, whatever comes into the mouth, they'll eat it, right? That's some of the less clever animals will even eat non-food pieces that you give them. Have you ever fed an ostrich? Yeah, I think an ostrich is one of the, I don't say dumbest animal that I ever met, okay? But
He's from Manhattan, he has fed an ostrich.
that's very true. But I got bitten by an ostrich that thought that my hand was food. Okay, and it hurts. Right? They don't think. They see something, they try to eat it. They see paper, they try to eat it. It's just they think everything is food. As people, as human beings, we have wisdom, and wisdom gives us the ability to differentiate between things, to separate between things, see what's good and what's bad. In all of the creation of the world in the 6 days. So Hashem says, Vayavdel Elokim ben ha'or v'ben ha'choshech. Hashem separated between light and dark. Hashem separated between the upper heavens, the upper waters, and the lower waters. Right? Hashem separated between land and the seas. Hashem created each plant for its kind. Each kind is separated. Each person has his own uniqueness. Each animal has its uniqueness. So separation is really one of the important things we can do in the world. What do we do right as Shabbat finishes?
Havdalah.
Havdalah. Separation has kedusha, exactly. Separation gives us kedusha. When a person marries his wife, so he separates. He's marrying that wife and not all of the other wives, right? Havdalah, at the end of Shabbat, we separate between Shabbat and the rest of the day. So separation really has here, by separating, we give identity to something. So if I now separate the beer we have here and the water, so that's water, and that's beer, and they're all different. But if I mix them up, so I don't have beer and I don't have water, I have just some kind of something which no one will drink. Okay, so really part of separating gives identity. And that brings us now to what are we creating by separation. I have a big pile of grain. I just now harvested the field, whatever it was, okay, and I have a big pile of grain. Can I go to the market and sell this grain now in the markets? Usually no. No one will buy grain. Will you go now to the market and buy tomatoes, not tomatoes, mixed up with all the leaves and everything? You want the tomatoes to be tomatoes, right? So separating between the good and the bad, I create here now something new, a product that can be sold in a shop. Okay, so it's like raw wheat, something that can be sold in a shop. So when we do borer, so we're creating here something new, something that can be sold. And that idea of creating something new, that brings us to when is borer allowed? And so after all this introduction, let's go into a very non-halacha, and then we'll start going into details. When is borer allowed? So the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara actually already says borer is permitted on Shabbat when we have three conditions: ochel, bayad, umiyad. Ochel means, and each one of them we'll explain as we go on. Ochel means you take the food out of the junk, okay, out of the garbage, out of the rubbish. Since you said your English, right? So you understand the word rubbish, right? Okay. So you take the food out from the rest. So that's ochel. I'm taking the food out. That's the first condition for it to be permitted. Bayad, I do it by hand, without any other instruments. And we'll get soon to a question, can you use a fork? I want to take, let's say I have a pile of fish, okay, meat, I have meat around it, and I have a few mushrooms on the plate, and like Danny, I do not like mushrooms. I actually like mushrooms. You don't know what you're missing. So I have a mixture of small pieces of meat inside the mushrooms, and I'm not such a picky eater. I will not touch a mushroom, but I don't mind eating meat that was cooked with mushrooms. Can I use a fork to take out the meat, or do I have to take it by hand? Okay, so that's a question, we'll get to it. And miyad. Miyad means for right away. And also that we will discuss, what does it mean right away? So right now, what if I'm eating in half an hour? Okay, let's say it's a kiddush in shul, and my wife went home already to organize the Shabbat table. And then it will take us half an hour, 45 minutes to come home, depending on how much schmoozing we do there. If it's in the early minyan, how long is the Dvar Torah in the early minyan, right? That's been an issue, or a discussion there. How much whiskey you have in the morning. So it's what is considered right away. All those details, Bezrat Hashem, we will go into them. But you can do borer if you have ochel, bayad, umiyad. If you take out the food, if you do it by hand, and if you do it for immediate eating. Why? How could it be? How come are we allowed to do something? That's the way I'm sending the question to you. If I use a machine to take it out, or if I use a safe to take it out, you'll say it's a asur mideoraita. Okay, but Torah law, it's forbidden. But if I do it by hand, you'll say it's permitted. How could that be? Let's ask like that. Arnold, can you take a pen on Shabbat and write your name? No. Okay. Can you take a pen on Shabbat and write your name with the left hand? It's a shinui. Permitted or forbidden? Forbidden. Forbidden. Okay. Although it's a shinui, everything you can do with a shinui, yeah. 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 So even shinui, it's still forbidden. Okay, you aren't chayav on it. In some cases, it's for a sick person or any other big need. We'll say maybe it's fine, but you're not allowed to do it. How come by borer, okay, by separating food, we say, you know what? If you do it for right away, if you do it by beshinui with the hand, so that's permitted. How come? What is it? A loophole here in the halacha? We try to find the loophole. Why is it permitted? It's mainly by borer. By borer, we find this thing. Maybe according to Rishonim, but borer. We find it in borer. With cutting also we have something like that, and we also have by kvisha, but that's cutting fine, something fine. It's not exactly tochen, but yeah, we find it by borer. Answering that question will give us a bigger understanding of the definition of borer, and we'll be able to answer other questions. I'm eating fish. I'm eating fish, and I found a fish bone inside my fish. One of my kids, I'm not sure exactly how he used to laugh, but as a joke, he used to love salmon when he was young. He still loves salmon, but not love like he used to do when he was young. And for a few weeks, like a week after week, his piece always had the fish bone inside it. It was like a joke. So we had to check his because he always had the bone. He got it. I'm not sure why. But yeah, so he was scared. It came got to a stage that we had to cut his fish fine, very fine for him, not relatively fine to make sure there's no bones inside it. So how come? So are you allowed to take the fish bone on Shabbat before you eat or no? No, on Shabbat. I mean, on Shabbat. Do you have fish on the plate here? Well, we'll get to it. Okay. So Danny's saying, obviously, no, you can't do it, right? He's taking the bad out of the good. What? So we have already an argument. That's already brings us to some action. Okay. Yeah. So it's a sakana. Okay, a sakana. But no, see the bone. Okay, see the bone. What do we do with the bone? We'll get to it. But we have two main opinions in the Rishonim. How come with borer all of a sudden you can do borer if you do all of those conditions? One opinion in the Rishonim is, let's go back a second to the definition of borer. We said that when I separate something or I sift something, what am I creating now? A new product that now can be used to sell, for example. So borer, okay, what I'm creating in borer is moving, making a simple growth from the land into something that now can be sold and brought to the market. So I'm creating here something new. It gets a new identity of now it's a product. I'm creating a product. What happens when we aren't creating a product? We're doing it as part of eating. If it's called in the terms of the poskim, kederech achila. That's the way of eating. Am I creating here now a new product? No, that's the way of eating. So let's go to the market. How do you get your wheat ready to go to the market? First, you do big quantities, right? It's not for immediate eating. Since you do big quantities, how do you separate between all of the mixture? With some kind of tool, right? It could be a sieve, some kind of tool, because it's big quantities. So it's for some time. It's to using some kind of tool. And usually when you separate the junk and the mixture, what will you be taking out? Will you be taking seed by seed of a wheat? Or will you be removing the bits of soil and small pebbles inside the wheat? What do you remove usually? The small pebbles, exactly, because the majority is the wheat. So you remove usually the small pebbles. So that's the way of creating a product. Okay, it's taking the junk out, doing it using some kind of tool, and doing it for a long time. That's the definition of creating a product. But when in all those 3 dimensions you do the opposite, that's not called creating a product. That's called eating. Okay, so the definition of borer is by how I do it. Hey, I'm not creating a product, I'm eating. You're allowed to eat on Shabbat? Yes. So since you're allowed to eat on Shabbat, you can also eat the normal way of eating. Some say, and we won't get to it today, that maybe also cutting a cucumber, for example, to fine pieces right before you eat. Or ripping up. Yeah, that's part of it. Ripping up packages so it's disconnected from the food. But if I cut something small, maybe it's a part of eating. That's how you eat. We'll get to the question. I take a fish bone out of the cooked fish. That's called the way of eating. Okay, that's how do we eat fish usually? When you eat fish, I don't eat fish. I eat only gefilte fish, no bones. Okay, that's why we eat gefilte fish on Shabbat. I always thought it was because that the Ashkenazi people were poor, so they had to put 95% breadcrumbs and 5% fish. Now it's to deal with the problem of borer. No bones in fish bones, right? But I had once I had a friend who was Ashkenazi, and he married a Moroccan wife. So they went for Shabbat to her family, and her mother wanted to make for son-in-law the fish that he likes. So she called his mother, Ashkenazi, and asked her, "How do you make the ktsitzot dag, the fish balls?" So she gave her her recipe, and he sat at the table and he said, "It tastes a bit familiar, but it's Moroccan fish. It's Moroccan fish with." It reminds me a bit of something at home. In the end, it's spicy, it's Moroccan, it has a red sauce around it. And then he said it's gefilte fish just made without the sugar and all the spices. So it's the same kind of fish, with the same way of mincing it. But anyway, that's bringing us out of them. So some will say, and we might even get to it today, some will say that the way of eating fish is taking the bone out before I eat it. No one, at least no one that I know, takes a bite of fish, puts it in his mouth, and then takes the bone out. No one does it, right? No one does it. The way of eating fish is taking the fish bone out. Okay, and that's why. Let's see here. Some poskim say it is forbidden to take the fish bone out, but Rav Eliezer Melamed in Pninei Halacha, okay, Pninei Halacha, says that someone who eats fish and he sees the bone inside his fish, he can take out the bone. You'll ask, we said only taking out the food is permitted and not the opposite. He said, that's derech achila. The normal way of eating fish is you take the fish bone out first. That's the normal way of eating fish. So that's the normal way of eating fish. He said it, by the way, only when the bone is inside the fish. And that's if it's just a mixture, so that's a problem. First, watermelon doesn't have any seeds inside today. No. Okay. Okay. So again, according to the but there's a joke on it soon. I'll tell you a joke. According to the Machmirim, but by fish bones, the Mishnah Berurah from what I remember is Machmir. Mordechai is Machmir. Chazon Ish was Machmir about it with the fish bone. So obviously you also can't take out the watermelon seeds. If you're Machmir by the fish bones, you can't take out the watermelon seeds. By the way, if you're Machmir, what do? You hold the bone, let's say, with your knife, and with your fork, you take the fish away. Okay, so you're moving the food. According to the Mekilim, and he brings Chavos Novadia and other poskim. According to the Mekilim, that's the way of eating. So that's the way of eating. And also, he'll say the same thing. Also by watermelon. How do you eat a watermelon? You first take out the seeds and then you eat it. Okay. Yeah, but according to their poskim, like for example, like the Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, for example, and other poskim say no, that's the way of eating. So just eat the normal way of you eat. Okay, so that's according to those poskim. As we if your mouth is even easier because that's you took the food and then you spit it away. So that's fine. That's for sure. But that everyone agrees it's fine. Yeah. And then when you were young, you used to do the watermelon seed fine. Like who can shoot the assistant? There's a joke. See, once an Arab guy, he goes like this, okay, in the field. So they ask him, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm plowing, I'm sowing watermelons. I'm planting watermelons." So that's why I'm doing this. So they tell him, "But you don't have any seeds in your hand." So he says, "Yes, I'm planting a seedless watermelon." Okay, so okay. Anyway, so that's according to the poskim will say, borer, when it's derech achila, when it's the way of eating, which is no. Finish about before, Mario? Okay, before the way of eating. I'll finish it up. Why so good? Before, if the borer is permitted because it's the normal way of eating. So also taking fish bones out right before you eat, that's permitted, but only if it's right before you eat, because that's the normal way of eating. Okay? Another opinion in the poskim, how come borer is permitted, and that's it's an interesting idea because we don't find it in other places, and maybe also Rashi gets also from another opinion. It says that there's a shinui. It said shinui mideoraita is permitted. Rabbanan, our sages, said it's forbidden, right? For example, we said writing with your left hand. Writing with your left hand, you can't do it. Chazal says it's forbidden. When there's a big shinui, when it's a shinui in a few dimensions, that's the other opinion, it's such a big shinui, it's not even considered borer. It's such a big shinui, it's not considered borer anymore. That opinion is a bit harder to understand. Maybe the both in the end come to the same idea. Okay? When there's such a big shinui, such a big change from the regular way of doing borer, we aren't creating here anything. Okay? The focus is on the eating, it's derech achila, we aren't creating anything here. That's two opinions in the Rishonim about borer. Before we conclude, let's just read the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch and Shin Yutet, and Bezrat Hashem, next week we'll go more into the details of the siman. Okay, so we'll just read the beginning after we understood the idea of borer. So says the Shulchan Aruch, haborer ochel mitoch psoret, someone who separates food from the psoret, from the mixture, from the junk. Okay, so he's taking out the food. Or shayu lefanav, and that's interesting. We'll also get to it Bezrat Hashem next week. Shnei minei ochalin uvorer min mimin acher. If you have mushrooms together with meat, both of them are edible things for most people, right? So it's food from food, but one of them he wants and one of them he doesn't want. The one that he doesn't want is considered psoret. That's junk, the rubbish. So if he does it benapao v'kvara, with a special tool, that's the regular tool you use to separate food, chayav. If he uses a kanon v'tamchui are other instruments used to separate food, it wasn't the normal things you use to separate food. Okay, so, patur אבל אסור. And it says the Shulchan Aruch, ואם בירר בידו כדי לאכול לאלתר, מותר. So if you took it by hand in order to eat right away, that's permitted. That's permitted. And here we'll continue the Ramah. It will answer us one question which we mentioned already, and Bezrat Hashem will continue next week. What happens if I'm not eating now? I'm eating in 5 minutes. Is that considered lealtar right away? Haga. Says the Ramah, whatever I'm separating for the seudah, for the meal I'm eating right away, that's considered for right away. Although it's obvious that if I'm now separating nuts from the peels, so I won't eat them now, I'll eat them in half an hour. But if it's for the close meal, for the meal we'll eat soon, that's called for an immediate use. Even if I'm now preparing the table, and I'm not going to eat all of the pile of nuts, also my guests will eat it, but I can also prepare it for them. Okay, so that's Rama. So we'll conclude here with the idea of borer, that we defined borer. What are we creating by borer? Yeah. If it's a close meal, you're preparing already for the meal.
Borer is also an object.
Borer is also an object. We'll get Bezrat Hashem to borer more next week. Borer is also when there's a mixture. What happens when there's no mixture? Okay, we'll get to all those questions, Bezrat Hashem, soon. I mean next week. Okay, Kol Tov.